Hey guys, Elliot here from Prismata. I'm in a new location today. I just moved and I'm going to be doing something a little bit different on the channel today. I'm making a video that's going to showcase some Prismata opening theory, which I don't necessarily always talk about a lot, but today I'm going to do a combo featuring some of my favorite units, Flame Animus and Hannibull. And before I get to that, I want to talk a little about the way that we try to balance openings, and in particular our goals when designing units with respect to the opening. We often get reports that say a certain combination of units is unfair, or when they're present a certain player, player 1 or player 2, has access to some type of build that gives them an advantage. And we don't want to have imbalanced games, we don't want to have auto wins, we don't want anything like that. And so every single one of these complaints we investigate. And so we look at all types of different rushes and builds and determine whether or not the opponent has counterplay, whether or not they lead to strong situations. And when we do find problems, we generally make adjustments to units. Whenever we put out new units, we spend a lot of time investigating the openings with those units to make sure they're not too lopsided in favor of one player or another. And Flame Animus Hannibull was one that was reported a long time ago, because there's a very good rush for player 1, as we're going to see. And we investigated it. We thought that there was some counterplay that player 2 could have. It didn't seem like that big of an advantage. And then recently it was re-reported and we investigated again, and we found that there's actually strong ways to shut down the counterplay, and it's extremely sharp and it's a very interesting line. So I wanted to share it with you guys. So here's how the rush plays out. As player 1, you start with a drone, and let's say your opponent just opens with 2 drones. You're going to go drone Blast Forge. Let's say your opponent replies Animus, and then you go Flame Animus Engineer, and you notice now that player 1 has 9 drones, a Blast Forge, a Flame Animus, and that's enough to produce exactly 9 gold, a blue, and a red, which is the cost of Hannibull. So player 1 can now pump 1 Hannibull a turn every single turn with no wasted resources at all. So let's say player 2 tries some counterplay on red. We're going to build a Hannibull. Already player 2 is starting to feel a bit of pressure. Like maybe you put down a Blast Forge here so you can start getting walls. Player 1 can actually just sit back and defend with this Hannibull, or attack with it. Defending is completely fine. So there's no use attacking with either of these rhinos because the damage will just be absorbed by the Hannibull. So maybe we'll make a wall and a Tarsier. Until player 2 can get to 6 damage, player 1 is not going to get injured whatsoever. And it's difficult to get up there with the increasing pressure that's mounted by these Hannibals. So you can see why this rush is so strong. For 2 attack, Hannibull is incredibly aggressively costed. It's very cheap, it's easy to access, and with Flame Animus present, getting that single red is very efficient. So this is quite a strong rush. And the problem here is that it's very difficult for player 2 to get in a position where they can actually kill a Hannibull. At this point, player 1 can sort of go all in, attacking with all the Hannibals, maybe making a wall and a Tarsier. And if player 2 wants, they can play this way and try and get down a Hannibull, but they're facing 7 attack, and they don't even have a way to really prevent a breach without bleeding a lot of drones. And essentially this position is basically hopeless for player 2. It's already won. So that's the Hannibull rush. You get a single Flame Animus and start pumping Hannibals, and it's very strong as a player 1 timing where you get that Flame Animus on the 3rd turn. So what else could you try and do against it as player 2? Well, against rushes, often a good response is just copy the other player. So let's say player 2 is going to get Drone Animus and go for the same type of build. Flame Animus, maybe we could get an extra drone here, maybe an engineer. You could get multiple engineers just to try and preempt the opponent's first Hannibull and that attack, which is fine. But you'll start to notice a problem arises. So here, player 1, they have their first Hannibull, they can just defend with it. Player 2's got their Hannibull as well, but there's sort of a stalemate where neither player can do anything because their opponent's Hannibull is just blocking. And the person who comes out of this stalemate ahead is going to be the person who can get to 6 damage first to enable you to kill the Hannibull, because the Hannibull's frontline, it has 6 HP. And that player in this line is always going to be player 1, because player 1 put down the first Hannibull. There's not really much player 2 can do to try and adjust the tempo of the game to try and get down an extra attack faster, because going Blast Forge Flame Animus, you don't really have any extra reds and blues to spare. You can't like squeeze in an extra Rhino or Tarsier or try and cut drones to get out something extra. You would have to put down a normal Animus instead of a Flame Animus, and when you do that, you're 1 attack behind, and you have 2 attack to make up, and you just can't get to 6 before your opponent does. And you can see what happens once she gets to 6. Your Hannibull's going to get shot. There's a couple of ways to play on, but they're essentially all winning. You can get the other Hannibull, or you get a wall and a Tarsier and sort of slow that bit down, but even if you get a Hannibull and allow a huge breach, it just doesn't work at all, because you're attacking for so much, and player 2 is going to lose another Hannibull here. Or even just not killing the Hannibull is also an option. But killing the Hannibull means these 4 Hannibals are going to live forever. And realistically, in this game, player 2 is never going to kill a single one of these Hannibals. There's just no way that player 2 is going to get to 6 damage ever. And so player 1 wins. We actually did a pretty deep analysis, and from this position right here, just both players opening drone, 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 it seems like player 1 has a forced win by doing this Hannibull Rush Drone Blast Forge. There's a couple other things you can try as player 2. You could try a Drone Blast Forge into Animus, getting Tarsiers and walls, sort of just playing base set only against this rush. The problem is that the rush is just too strong. You can even get to 6 attack and maybe try and take out 1 Hannibull, but you get your drones decimated. The Hannibull player can transition to Tarsiers and overpower you later in the game. Any strat that you can think of that's sort of base set only loses to this rush, because the Hannibull is just so much more cost effective than the base set attackers. And that's kind of to be expected. The problem is that the Hannibull's weakness, the 6 HP, it's just not exploitable in the short time frame you have before the rush overpowers you, when the Flame Animus is present to accelerate the rush. So, what is the counterplay? Well, the counterplay is actually, oftentimes this is true in many rushes in Prismata, if you're losing to a rush and you can't beat it by copying the person and executing the same rush but later, you should execute the same rush sooner. So the turn 1 Blast Forge as player 2 is actually, it leads to some quite complicated counterplay. And what player 2 can do here is get the Flame Animus first and save the 2 gold, no engineer. And I'll show you what happens if we get this copycat Hannibull game. Player 1, of course, has the 2 extra gold, can get an engineer, and you notice that player 2 is 2 drones short. That's going to create some problems in the build order, but actually they can get to 6 attack first. So they go Hannibull. The opponent here, probably you want to go Hannibull. It's a bit tricky because you're sort of worried about the other player breaching and killing drones, which can slow down a Hannibull, but in fact, attacking here is losing, and the reason is because even if you build rhinos and hold drones back, your opponent's going to counterattack you and be able to prevent you from getting to 6, and in this case, player 1 can get to 6 first. So attacking with the Hannibull is bad, and there actually are a number of complicated lines, like attacking with the Hannibull and building a rhino, but not holding a drone back is actually a playable line, and it's quite complicated. And the reason it's playable because you're threatening to build a Hannibull next turn because you have 2 in the bank and you have 7 gold stored. So you can get another Hannibull and threaten to get to 6, and this forces player 1 to attack you and destroy the Rhino. But attacking you forces them to have to deal with their defense because their Hannibull is no longer defending. And it gets really complicated. It's a lot of back and forth, but we studied the line to death and determined that player 2 actually loses doing that. So attacking with this Hannibull here, not an option. You've got to leave it on defense. However, if you do leave it on defense, you can win. And the way you do that is you build a Tarsier, and player 1 can do a number of things, but probably just getting another Hannibull. And the idea with that Tarsier is it's going to have a timing that allows you to get to 6 attack first. So with the Hannibull here and the Tarsier, player 2 can now get 6 attack first, and there's not too much player 1 can do. The best try seems to be building another Hannibull, just because 5 damage is a lot, but player 1 actually has enough to deal with it. They can hold back drones. It's really necessary to protect this Tarsier so that you can continue attacking for 6. But it seems to work out because as long as you keep this wall alive and keep 5 drones, you can just wall every turn, and then you have enough protection among those walls that you're never going to really get breached. And player 1 can't do anything here because another Hannibal's going to die. You can just mass walls. Essentially, player 1 is never going to get to 6 damage. These 2 Hannibals are never going to die, and the game's going to be over. So that is player 2's counter rush. And so the fact that player 2 has this counter rush made it seem like the Flame Animus Hannibull build, maybe it's okay because there's interesting counterplay and the game can get complex and there's a number of things that can happen. And this counter rush, by the way, isn't winning. Because, of course, player 1 doesn't have to play into it by getting Hannibals themselves, so you can get an asymmetric game. The problem is that upon analyzing additional player 1 options after player 2 opens turn 1 Blast Forge, we discovered that player 1 can probably just win. And here's how it's done. So player 2 goes for the Flame Animus, and now instead of going a symmetric build half a turn later with the same Hannibull rush, player 1 here on the bottom can just sort of casually wall and econ and play a slower type of game. And I'll show you how it works. So drone wall, Hannibull. I'm checking my notes here because I want to get it exactly right. Flame Animus, and not a drone but an engineer, and this is necessary in order to defend against the attack that's gonna happen in a subsequent turn. And here, of course, player 2 doesn't have enough for another animal, so another Hannibull. Rhino is probably better than Tarsier, just because the tempo of the attack is really important, and the defense is also important, but we tried both. But I'll show you the line with the Rhino. Oops, of course, we want to attack with that Hannibull because it's going to kill an engineer. So here, we're not going to get a Hannibull. Again, because we're going to lose that battle of who gets to 6 first, but the plan is to win anyway without getting any Hannibals. So we're going to do Steel Splitter, Tarsier, Engineer, and we have 4 on defense, so buying that Engineer last turn was very important. And here, player 2 can get another Hannibull, and we're going to attack with everything, so even just allowing these 2 Engineers to die, it seems correct, but either way player 2 plays it, it doesn't work out properly. So we're going to do leaving the Steel Splitter back. Actually, is the stronger way to play, and Steel Splitter Tarsier, only killing one of the engineers, and this is going to lead to a win for player 1. So probably here. It's questionable what you want to do, but probably you want to leave the Hannibull on defense and make another Rhino. There are other ways to play it, but attacking for 4 is always good into a wall Steel Splitter with a single engineer, exploiting the lack of granularity. Unfortunately, it's not enough, so wall Rhino is the next play, leaving the Steel Splitter back. And here you probably just want to get another Hannibull and go all in. It's debatable, but we haven't found any play for player 2 that leads to a win. And what are you going to do here? Kill the Flame Animus probably, and wall Rhino. And it seems like player 1 can just hold from this point onwards. You can actually leave the Rhino back for free because the opponent has no engineers to defend. But still, there's not too much you can do, like maybe make a wall. The Hannibals are just going to die, and the player on the bottom is just going to eventually be able to take care of the rest of the game. It's actually, I think, best to leave 3 drones back and probably kill the Hannibull, but yeah, there's not too much that can be done. Essentially, from this point onward, player 1 can comfortably win, get back to 6 attack, kill the Hannibals. There's a number of ways to do it. But anyways, I think this illustrates the fact that, well, openings can be very complicated. So the first thing we saw was this player 1 Hannibull rush that seemed really strong. Getting the Flame Animus, getting Hannibals every turn off of 9 drones. It just seems really strong, and it is. And then from there we saw that actually there's this really interesting counterplay of player 2 getting a turn 1 Blast Forge to try and get their own Hannibals first. And sort of moving the timing of the rush half a turn sooner, it completely changes the texture of the game because you don't have 9 drones, you can't Hannibal every turn, and when player 2 executes the same rush, it's not as strong. And player 1 can defend it off pretty much just with base set only and actually force a win. And so, you know, if player 1's allowed to execute this rush, player 1 wins. If player 2 attempts this turn 1 Blast Forge counterplay, player 1 also wins. So it seems like with base set only plus Hannibull plus Flame Animus, it's going to be a player 1 win, regardless of what player 2 tries. Player 1 can always force an auto win. There's a couple of questions. How bad is this actually? And when we find auto wins, and we very rarely found true auto wins that we feel don't have any counterplay, but when we have found them, there's sort of 3 factors we consider. One is how easy are they to execute? How many lines do you need to know? How likely is your opponent going to be able to throw up some defense that maybe you might make a mistake, or maybe you might not win? And I mean, this rush, Flame Animus Hannibull, is very easy to execute. If you do this on a ladder, you're going to beat a lot of people because they're not going to know how to counter it, and even if they do try and counter it, you have a counter to their counter, so you're going to be able to win without memorizing too many different lines and variations. How often does this come up? Well, Flame Animus Hannibull is a 2-unit combo. A 2-unit combo happens, you're going to see these two in like 1% of games if you play base plus 8 in Prismata. And that's often enough that it is concerning. We don't want anybody to have no chance in 1% of their games if they end up as the wrong side on a match with units that can cause a forced win. The third thing we consider is how volatile the combination is. Because sometimes, you could maybe think of a set of units that maybe player 2 can execute some rush that wins. But if that rush is spoiled by the addition of any other units to the random set, then probably we don't really care about it. This particular rush, the problem is that there's a lot of other units in Prismata that do not affect this game at all. If you add Lucina to this game, I can guarantee you that going for Lucina, you're just going to lose against Hannibals. So the game of base set only plus Flame Animus Hannibull plus Lucina, it just reduces to base set only plus Flame Animus plus Hannibull. So in that case, we would call Lucina a blank, sort of a unit that doesn't affect the outcome of the game at all. And the question is sort of how many blanks are there in the Flame Animus Hannibull game? And there's actually a lot. Like there's a very small number of Prismata units that affect the rush in a way that disturbs player 1's ability to have an automatic victory. And even then, the rush for player 1 is so strong relative to player 2's sort of counterplay that with other units added, it's quite likely that player 1 can still win. So this actually isn't volatile, and that's what makes it a big problem. So we are going to make a change. It's going to be announced this week. Maybe it'll be announced by the time you guys see this video. But anyways, one thing that we always question when these things happen is what's really at fault. Is it Flame Animus? Is it Hannibull? And Flame Animus is a strong unit, but strong units don't necessarily create auto wins. What you need is a strong unit combined with a very specific strong timing that is resistant to counterplay. And Hannibull's design is kind of at fault, because here's what Hannibull is. Hannibull is a super cheap, really cost-effective attacker that has a weakness. The weakness is its front line, and the way you exploit that is, once you get to 6 damage, you can destroy Hannibals, and you don't have to worry about your opponent's walls or anything like that. And of course, that creates some problems, because Hannibull is actually strongest in the early game when your opponent can't get to 6. And units that are really strong in the early game and maybe have a harder time finding a role in the later game They're tricky to balance, because if we make them too weak, then they never get played in the late game. And if we make them too strong, then they can cause rushes that lead to instant victories, and we really don't want those to happen. So units like Hannibull are tricky to balance, and just adding 1 gold to its cost, it would definitely stop the rush, but then it would make Hannibull into a really boring unit that would hardly see any play at all, because you're only going to play it when it's strong in the opening, and if it's weak in the opening, you're just never going to play it. So we're almost certainly going to make a bigger design change to Hannibull, and we have some in mind that we've tested quite thoroughly, and they lead to actually really interesting games. So I'm looking forward to unveiling what we are going to do to modify Hannibull. I guess another big issue with a unit like Hannibull is when you play the mirror with both players rushing Hannibals, it seems like whoever gets to 6 first just wins. And you never really want to have a situation where there's just sort of a single finish line and whoever crosses the finish line first wins, because it creates for really sharp play and can often lead to auto wins. We've had versions of Shredder that we've tested in the past that were really strong. Like if we added another HP to Shredder, it would actually be a problem unit. And we tested it, we tried it. But anyways, so there will be a change to Hannibull. We've investigated many other openings like this to try and determine if there was anything imbalanced or unfair. There are a couple of other close calls, but often we find counterplay, and we think it's enough counterplay to not have to worry about specific changes. And other rushes are very volatile as well. If you have a rush that works with 2 units, but is spoiled by 70% of the rest of the other Prismata units, then probably we don't care as much. But in any case, if you ever find any rushes that you think lead to auto wins or lead to huge advantages for a player, always send them to us. We check every single one of them out. We actually spend a huge amount of effort making sure the game is balanced, probably more than a lot of other companies do. And the reason is because the nature of Prismata. Like, bad balancing in Prismata just ruins the game completely. You know, in a collectible card game, maybe it just makes a card strong, and that can even be a good thing because it makes the company money. For us, if something's too strong or something leads to an auto win, it can really spoil the experiences of players. So we definitely want to hear about it. If you know of any opening combos that you think are broken or lead to anything unfair or unfun, and send them my way if you got them. Anyways, I will catch you guys in the next video. See you around.